So hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for our ICNC Educational Webinar Series. My name is Steve Chase, and I'm the Manager of Academic Initiatives for the International Center on Nonviolent Conflict, and I'll be the moderator today for this webinar on the role of cultural resistance practices in the Mexican feminist movement. Today we have with us the presenter Pancho Hernandez, who will share his recent research on the intersection of civil resistance and the feminist movement in Mexico, as this movement uses the arts and symbols and cultural practices as part of their effort to stop violence against women. We'll ask Pancho why he chose to research the civil resistance efforts of women in his country and their male allies to denounce injustice, remember the victims, and heal wounds caused by gender violence in the patriarchal system. We'll also explore the lessons of this important movement in Mexico to the global feminist movement in civil resistance theory and practice. Today's webinar will be in about an hour in length and be divided in two major segments. The first portion is a presentation by Pancho that will last about 30 minutes or so, and the final will be a question and answer session in which you can ask Pancho your questions or share comments based on your own experience. During the presentation, if you'd like to minimize your control panel, you can do so by clicking the little red arrow at the top of your screen that points inward. And you don't have to worry about background noise during the webinar, as all participants are currently muted except for Pancho and myself, so you won't be interfering with the audio. During the question and answer portion, and we'll go over this again once Pancho's done with his presentation, there are two ways to ask a question. One way is that you can, is on the first blue arrow pointing to the hand. You can click on that on your control panel, and that will alert me when we get there that you have a question. And then I can unmute you, say, your first name to let you know, unmute you, and you can verbally ask your question, make a quick comment, whatever, and then Pancho can respond. The other way is the blue arrow down below is that there's actually a question box that you can type in questions, and I'll be looking at those when we're in that and asking Pancho the questions for you verbally. And so you can do it either way. Now, we often get to most questions, but sometimes there's a few we don't have time for in the allotted hour. In that case, we'll send your questions to Pancho and get his written answers that we will send out in about a few days to a week. That'll have the link to the edited webinar and the additional answers to questions. So that should work fairly well. And we want to thank you for joining us today. We're live tweeting the webinar at Civil Resistance, and you also can tweet using the hashtag ICNC webinars. If you have questions at the end, send them to webinar@nonviolentconflict.org, as you can see on your screen, and we'll collect those questions and get those to Pancho. Try to do that later today, though, so we have enough time to turn it around. And of course, you can always find more information about us online at Facebook and our Twitter account. I want to just take a little time to introduce Pancho Hernandez, who did this research. He was a research fellow for ICNC in 2019. He is a Mexican-based activist, community organizer, philosopher, and an anthropologist with more than 10 years of work in nonviolent action and peace building. He's an experienced trainer. He's delivered workshops and seminars and given conference talks for grassroots groups and several universities in Mexico and countries like India, Brazil, Colombia, Ecuador, Honduras, and the USA. His academic research is focused on the use of arts or cultural resistance in social responses to violence, including civil resistance and various social movements in Latin America. And as I mentioned, he was named as one of ICNC's 2019 Research Fellows, which supported the research on which this webinar is based. So Pancho, welcome. We look forward to hearing from you and discussing your presentation after it, and I'll just switch over the...
Okay, thank you so much, Steve, Bruce, the ICNC team, for allowing me to present this topic that is very interesting. It's very polemic. It has been in Mexico, in Latin America. And as a man, as a male participant of this movement, it's also interesting how we can focus and highlight this movement in different approaches. And the first thing I want to say is, well, I don't want to be here as someone who will say to women how their movement is. This is not mansplaining, and this is something I want to make clear since the very beginning of my presentation. I don't pretend to be mansplaining what feminism is for women. Is mainly as a man, I want to learn from feminism, and it's what I've been doing. Taking this case study of the feminist movement in Mexico as an example of civil resistance and creative resistance. So, well, my approach is more from the solidarity. I want to learn more. I want to change also the patterns of values and how we learn to be a man. And of course, feminism, it's like not only the theory that helped us to rethink our masculinity, it's also a social movement and a social practice. So it's the first thing that I want to tell you, and specifically, well, especially if there are women and feminist women over there, they will say like, why this man again wants to explain what our movement is. I just want to focus on how the use of arts and symbols it's meaningful for this movement, and I also want to clarify some misconceptions around the feminist movement in Mexico and Latin America. So I hope I can be of some help in that sense and not pretend to be too much pretending to explain to you. Okay, so the first of all, we have to understand the grievances and that women are living in Mexico nowadays. We have become one of the most violent countries for women in the world. As you can see in this map, it's a map of feminicides done by some researchers, and they found these trends on femicides. We have at least 9 to 10 femicides a day, and different other indicators of gender violence are very high in Mexico, as sexual harassment, rape, sexual aggressions, and different kinds of violence that women suffer every single day in Mexico. The numbers are massive, and this is why the feminists are so strong in Mexico now, because it's really a social concern. It's a big problem nowadays. So we will understand that gender violence is based on certain values that it's called the patriarchal system, how gender or the sex-gender relationships create a hierarchization in our society, and how that hierarchization became kind of normal or accepted by everyone. No one started questioning or criticizing the gender roles before the feminists. or before women started to think how the world and the social reality was built on over the pressure of women. And then also, it's not only women, it's also the other indigenous, Black people, the poor, the weak. But the patriarchal system is at the roots of the problem of gender violence, of the macho culture, and also some of those theoricists, feminist scholars like Rita Segato, Silvia Federici, Silvia Rivera Cusicanqui, they have thought how the intersections of patriarchal system of the masculinity, but also the economical system and the racial system, the colonization, all together. They kind of mesh and create different levels of oppression. So it's really important to understand not only the patriarchal system as the domination of men over women, but it's a whole social system and a belief system. It's a cultural values that we have in our minds, in our mindset, that creates violence against women, but also against many other kinds of identities. And I think feminist theory have brought us this into discussion, how we have built our world. Okay, this is a little bit of theory, like the theoretical part, that we have to understand symbolic violence and gender violence as a part of a system of oppression that can be also economical, political, legal, etc. Okay, some of my questions that I've been thinking as is taking this feminist movement in Mexico that was very strong and was, I can say that was the strongest and most relevant social movement in Mexico in the last year, at least one who caught more attention from the public, like really in a massive scale. So because of my interest as an anthropologist has been the study of arts and culture as a means for social change and also political defiance, I've been thinking how the symbols are being used by this movement, why they use this creative or artistic activism, why it's effective, how it can be something that can help for civil resistance movements to have more strategies, and what's the role of creativity in social movements. We always refer to arts as something interesting, as symbols, as relevant for social movements, but we have to think what's the use of those movements. It's not only to protest, maybe they have more meaning. So in the feminists, I saw a massive display of these symbolic practices and arts everywhere. So I start thinking like one of the main features of this movement shall be the use of arts, and that's why I focus on this case study. Well, my methodology, I just will go quick on this. It's mainly ethnographic. As an anthropologist, I did these follow-up interviews, but also knowing, and we have to think as researchers in the sensitivity of the people who you are wanted to study. And I understood that most of some of the trends of this movement of the feminists is separatists. That means that they don't allow or they don't want men to come into their spaces, and of course I respect that a lot. So I had a team of assistants in this research that were actually in the same identity of the main participants of the movements. They were young women, feminists, anthropologists, artists. So I have this team, so they allow me, or they help me to go and to enter into spaces or to talk to people with a different confidence. So that was kind of also try to understand the people you want to work with. Also a very important source of information were also digital networks and the social media and the follow-up of the hashtag, the trend topics, and also the discussion, the narrative that was going on the media. Okay, I will just mention now that the topic of the relationship between women and civil resistance has been since the very beginning of many of the civil resistance movements. Apart from Gandhi, the example of Gandhi is not here because in the Indian context, he didn't. It's not that he didn't allow, but women participation was too low, and we can even think about Kasturba Gandhi as someone who we don't know that much about her. So we can think more in the figures like Septima Clark or Rosa Parks, who were those who started this the boycott on the Montgomery bus system and created these nonviolent strategies. In the US, we also have in Argentina, Madres de Plaza de Mayo, who are a group of mothers who gather in the central square of Buenos Aires, Plaza de Mayo, and they are demanding justice and truth because of their daughters and sons that were kidnapped by the dictatorship in Argentina. So they are still missing. So they are having this nonviolent action, what Jean Sharp will call nonviolent intervention with their bodies in the square. And it's an amazing group of women that have been fighting for more than 30 years. In Liberia, we saw this movement of women. Gibowi was the leader of this movement that were demanding to stop the war that they were fighting about against dictator Taylor. So they use a lot of songs and rituals and elements of their own culture to fight against this dictatorship. So that was also a great movement in Africa. And in India, we have the Chipko movement that was protecting the land and especially the forest against, all this process of destroying the nature. So we can see how women, specifically and exclusively women participation in civil resistance movements, have been something that not had been highlighted that much, but still it's something present and we can learn from it. Okay, so we will see this idea of how the participation of women in different campaigns, as this report from Mary Principe that shows how the involvement and participation of women in these movements are like really helpful and powerful for the movement. So I will go now a little bit quickly with the case. Okay, feminism in Latin America. We have these different perspectives of feminism that has been criticizing white and metropolitan feminism, feminist theories, and this is more like how in the social practice it's being created a different shape of feminist theory. We have these the green scarf as a symbol for the pro-abortion rights, and it has started in Argentina. And maybe you have seen that demonstration or protest of women using this green scarf for the rights of our own bodies, well, their own bodies, of women who wants to stop or interrupt their pregnancy. And then we have also indigenous feminism that's mainly in the Andean region, Bolivia, Ecuador. They have, so Silvia Rivera Cusicanqui is one of the main representatives of this kind of feminism that also intersects with racial and gender and economical, historical kinds of oppression as the Afrofeminism that it's raising mainly in Brazil, Colombia. And also we have a great movement of, for gender rights and LGBTQ movements, and mostly a lot of participants of the feminist movement in Mexico are they consider themselves lesbo feminists. So that's also very interesting to highlight, but I cannot go in deep in that. Okay, so how do we intersect arts and feminism? And that's just what I'm trying to understand and to research. So we have to understand the visual culture. And as in this quote of Nellie Richards says that feminist art is not only the art made by women or demanding some kind of the rights or something for women. It's mainly how to dispute the hegemony of masculinity in this visual culture, how art can contest these assumptions about gender, about sexual difference, about the relationships and the identities of men and women. So art, feminist art is not only like how women are demanding justice for their movement. For example, it's more how we can start questioning our own cultural assumptions about gender, and that it's done with the visual culture, but also with the different elements like music, for example, and the use of symbols. And then, okay, this is I will start talking now about the feminists in Mexico in the last year. That it's I will not take like the whole story of feminists in Mexico. I will just take some span of time that I chose because was like very strong. The movement that happened during this time was from August last year, from August of last year till March of this year, 2020. What happened in August is that some police officers supposedly, but there were a lot of proofs about it. They raped a teenager during the night in some peripheral neighborhood in Mexico City. So this sparks like a lot of indignation and grief, like how the police that's supposed to be those who protect us are actually against us. So they started what was called the pink glitter revolution. As you can see this picture of this guy with pink glitter all over his head and hair and shoulders. He was the chief of the police. He was like the main chief of police in Mexico. And a group of feminists, as a way of protest, they throw this pink glitter over him, like trying to destroying his authority. This symbol of authority was just destroyed, and the demand was like, you are the police, but you are not taking care of me. My friends take care of me. So after that, the pink glitter became a symbol. Just after this protest, when the police chief was thrown with this pink glitter, there was another protest, and this happened. And this I want just to highlight because, or just to mention, because this was what took all people's attention to a different place. You know, then a group of feminists or participants of this protest, then they went and started destroying some kind of property, bus stations, a police station also. And in civil resistance, this is a big topic, and we usually face this in our movements, how the property destruction, stealing stores, destroying police stations that like just happened in the US, and now it's going on in Wisconsin as well. It's always problematic, and I would just want to mention that this had pros and cons for the movement. And I remember I was criticizing this, but then I interviewed a participant of these actions that were destroying and burning things, and she tried to explain that the idea was not to hurt anyone, was just to express their grief, indignation, and how they feel. And the emotional content is very important in this movement. We usually think like our feelings or our emotions must be apart from our social action, but in this movement it's like really deep, like many action, or at least the justification for this kind of actions comes from they are feeling grief. I would just want to say that this is a big challenge for social movements, as the same to the feminism, how to face these agents that can be the agent provocateur, or how we can try to decrease the level of these kind of actions when society will be against you. After this happened, all people were against the women, and the whole discussion went to another side, not to the focus of the gender violence, the machismo, and what happened to the girl that was raped by the police officers. People were saying, oh, these girls are destroying property. So it's very interesting how this shift the discussion and the social narrative to another way. But okay, and then, but also some kinds of symbolic destruction of these movements, I think have been very powerful, creative, and also have sparked this discussion in society about what's the role of the state about gender violence. So they started doing this graffiti in monuments. This was in Mexico City and in the north, in the border, almost. And this is some of the most relevant and important monuments in Mexico City, the one on the left. So it was like very powerful when they just graffiti this monument. And if we see what happened also in the Black Lives Matter or the anti-racist movement all over the world in the last months, they were also targeting monuments, because those monuments represent a history and symbolize elements of power. And if we still have these big statues of white men that were slaveries still in the central square of our city, that means something, and that creates an idea of power and the history that we come from. So when they started graffiti or kind of destroying some of the monuments, I found that symbolic action very powerful in the sense to regain some level, some attention, or mainly some how women have been deleted from history. So this has been very powerful actions, and I consider them not as a violent action, not as a destruction. I consider painting these monuments and even destroy them as a way of non-violent action, especially if they want to challenge those symbols of power. Okay, something very also powerful have been street performances. Some of them have been done with music, other with representations, artistic representations. Like I will show you the performance that moved all around the world that was called A Rapist in Your Way, and these are pictures of it. I will also show you, this was very interesting how a performance could unify women all over the world. And this is a picture of Mexico City. They gather and they almost fill the entire Zócalo, that is the central square, and it's so huge and a lot of people. So I want to show you this video just briefly, so you can see the power of this performance that it was called A Rapist in Your Way. It was created by a Chilean artist called Las Tesis, and the idea was to, with a song and body movements like dancing, they were denouncing the different kinds of violence that women suffer every day, and how the system as a whole is a rapist, that it's judging women because why they are. So, okay, that's like the idea of the performance. I will show you. The patriarchal system is a judge, punishment, it's the violence that you don't see. And well, this was a really powerful message. It was adopted by women all over the world, really, and even I think in Iran or Turkey, there some women were arrested because of singing this song. So it's powerful. Of course, we can challenge the system with symbols, with songs, with graffiti. So feminism has shown us this, how powerful arts and symbols can be for this means of gender violence. Okay, this is another strategy that has been used by these feminist artists, are like clotheslines, and in them they usually write sexual harassment denounces. So it's very powerful because sometimes women doesn't feel so confident of denouncing violence or challenging some male-dominated spaces that are usually like the schools or working places where men have like a more central or dominant role. So by this kind of Me Too, it works like a Me Too, like denouncing what is going on these spaces with these clotheslines. Very, very simple. It's just this line and they put them and hang denounces. Also, in a more artistic way and also helping victims of violence, they created these woven clothes that they hang also in public spaces where they reflect experiences of violence suffered by women. And this is also very deep, you can see in the left and the right, and actually was displayed on the protest of March 8th. So this is also some powerful way to communicate, to express, but for the individual who is like doing it in the process, I consider this can heal violence, and it's also one of the outputs of this research. What is the meaning of these practices? It's not only like a social protest or a social action, it's also like internal in our emotions. As I mentioned in the beginning, emotions are very relevant for this movement. So every time that we can express and heal those emotions, it's also a political act. The personal is politic for feminist theory. So yeah, I consider that healing internally can also help to be more empowered also in the social level. So these are beautiful woven clothes expressing how violence is suffered by women, and it's are very powerful messages. Okay, this is also some pictures of 8 March protests. They were like massive, and as I mentioned in the beginning, I consider those were like the most impressive and important movement and protests that happened in Mexico the last year. For so far, they created a huge organization, different strategies, and this protest of 8 March, that it's Women's Day, was followed by a women's general strike the next day. So they started creating like a full strategy, going from maybe these radical actions and then starting to creating more spaces for women, circles of listening, exclusive spaces for women. The Zapatistas created, organized a meeting only for women in the Zapatista territory in Chiapas in the south. So all these experiences have give a lot of strength to this movement, have created more solidarity and also different networks of action among feminist activists in Mexico. As you can see, this was the second meeting of women who struggled and was organized by women, and only women attended. So it was also a very interesting space, and the participants who I interviewed of this event, they expressed how they felt more safe and confident, and they can organize and talk better when they are only with among women. And that's something very interesting, because they are reclaiming and gaining those spaces that they don't have to ask for. They are creating them. And as men, we have to respect a lot those spaces, and we have to try, if we want to help, maybe we have to fight also in our own side. That means that we have to work with other men, trying to show these ideas and to rethink how, as men, we are behaving and are trying to do something about this gender violence that affects us all of us, not only women. Men are also affected by gender violence. Okay, so I will finish on here, because I will prefer to have conversation and dialogue, and if you have some questions that you may have, I will just finish with these three ideas that, as I said, like, I consider that we have to consider how arts are useful for this struggle. It's not only that they are a furniture. If we sing in a protest, it will look better, or if we do a mural, people will just look at us. It's like, I consider that for one side, you can denounce and communicate a public message with these actions, but also you can do a memory and try to visualize something that wants to be hidden. For example, femicides in Mexico, for example, mainly in the northern border in Ciudad Juarez. It's very complicated, but we can assure that the government and the military and many other powers, economical powers, are, are responsible for those deaths. So they want to, people forget that. They don't want to people think again what happened with those girls. So the act of remember, the act of make memory, and denounce and say this happened here and we don't want this to happen again, it's very important for social change. And the last one, it's what I already said about healing process. Like, violence can be also, an experience of violence can be traumatic, of course, and we don't know how to deal with those emotions. So arts can be also a way of trying to communicate, to express, and to understand those emotions in order to don't affect us in a deeper level. So if we express and we communicate, and we also create some networks, social networks, that can provide us some shelter and some relief and support, I think, and I have seen in these cases that people start changing their lives and changing the perspective and healing emotionally, at least. So this will be important also for civil resistance, because we are seeing this kind of action and strategies that can be comprehensive, that can be integral, that can heal, but at the same time denounce, but at the same time be a way of protest. And also we are learning and how they are innovating in the field of civil resistance. They are creating new strategies, new symbols, and all the time creativity is on the core of these movements. So I want to finish with these ideas, how arts, how creativity, and how the symbols can be helpful for our civil resistance movements. And in this case of gender violence and women violence, I think that arts are some of the best way for them to have these struggles. If we remember this James Scott idea of the weapons of the weak, I don't consider them as weak at all, but those are the weapons that people who doesn't have like power and don't want to use violence can use and can apply for their movements. And I hope you could get some ideas and some insights for our own movements, how these can be very powerful and can create the change we want to see. So thank you so much. I will share these slides with all of you, so you can have the ideas and some of the reference that I mentioned here. Well, Thank you. Thank you for listening.
You can click on the hand if you want to speak a comment or question to Pancho, or you can type in the question box, and I'll do this. I would ask the question for you, so you can do it either way. So I'll give people a little time to do that. And I just wanted to thank you, Pancho, because the specifics of this movement is really important, but also highlighting the creativity and the cultural resistance, because a lot of times civil resistance is only thought about in terms of sort of marches and disruptive resistance, strikes, boycotts, or constructive resistance, creating alternative institutions. But what you're highlighting is how, you know, arts and symbols have to be contested and can improve the creativity and power of a movement. So the question is, what originally drew you to dedicate your studies to focusing on the feminist movement?
Okay. Well, thank you, Jasmine. Yeah, well, as I mentioned a little bit in the beginning, my interest first was like how we as men we can change also, and we can contribute in the fight against gender violence. Why it's a big concern in Mexico for all men and women, because gender violence and femicides have been really I don't know how to say it. It's brutal. It's insane how this has becoming. And in my studies about violence, I interviewed and I had contact with mothers of victims of femicides. And when I knew their stories and understood what happened, for me was like very touching in my personal experience in my life. So I started being even more sensitive to this topic. And then also as a person, I want to think differently how to be a man. And also I want to share that with other friends, with my other men, my male friends. Also, we have to change in many ways, because lots of that gender violence starts within ourselves and our values and our beliefs and the way we behave. And so that's why I think when I saw all that suffering that was causing gender violence and macho culture, and I don't want to repeat that in myself. And I consider that to be a very important way to change society as a whole. If we can change that kind of violence that men exercise over women, we will change other things, even our relationship with nature or with different cultures or races. So yeah, I think that drove me into this topic. And then, of course, as a researcher of civil resistance and social movements, the rise of this movement last year was massive and so powerful, and so that also sparked my interest in this topic. So there are personal reasons, but also kind of academic and theoretical reasons as well.
Great. We have another question. This one from Janine. And it's what you added, the picture of the green scarf. So what's the story behind the green scarf? And is it only present in Mexico, or has that symbol spread throughout other Latin American countries?
Okay, well, the idea of the green scarf started on, not the idea, the symbol started on Argentina, and was because of the pro-abortion movement was taking this green symbol or green scarf as a symbol, and they started going into the protest with the green scarves, and was adapted, as far as I know, was originally from Argentina, but then like expanded all over Latin America, and in Mexico became also very meaningful because we were in different states looking for pro-abortion rights in Mexico. So that was almost at the same time, and also in the raising of this anti-gender violence movement. So the idea is how, but the most important thing is how this green scarf can unify women all across the continent, and they can feel together, and they can feel this sorority. So maybe it was just like a pretext. It's also another symbol. It's the purple, like the purple. It can be a scarf or the color. It's also a powerful symbol, or the pink glitter. So the most important or interesting thing is how these small actions or symbols became so powerful and popular, and they spread all over. So I will also ask to female participants here why those symbols were so meaningful and powerful for them, because they just spread, wow, like in days, in weeks. Women all over Latin America were wearing the green scarf. So that's amazing.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So the question is just, were you able to interview the sort of producers of this creativity, feminist artists who were politically engaged, and what were they sharing with you about, you know, their motivations and passions for doing this work?
Oh yeah, well, yeah, of course I had contact and relationship. Actually, I've been involved in the feminist movement since a while. Now became like more scholar interest as well, but yeah, I've been in touch, and I have lots of friends that are part of feminist rap group, music group, bands, art, visual artists. So what they say mainly, it's, I think, it's a lot of feeling. It's why they drives them. It's mainly this indignation, this grief, this idea of injustice that they live, the fear also. I think fear, it's a very permanent feeling that women have, like in their daily life. Like they experience fear every day and many times a day. And so I think that it's one of the core drivers of this, not the movement. The movement, it's a social movement and it's different. But most of the participants have this high level of indignation and grief about the systems we live in. So I consider that like some of the most important parts. And then that's why they use arts, because I consider also that an artistic way to express emotion is one of the best ways to do it, and because art works with emotions, works with expression. What do you want to say? What do you want? What do you feel, and how do you express it? So what I have seen and in talks, interviews, and visiting places, it's mainly this idea of being together. That if we are together, we are strong, and we have to overcome all those fears and different, also the macho culture inside in women. Women also have of course the patriarchal system, and we all reproduce it. So when they start thinking like we have to be together and we have to create union and this kind of female power, I think that is the most important, and what they are actually doing with all these movements. So arts or these symbols are sometimes just a pretext, just an excuse for action and for something else, for creating these bonds among them. And that is, I think, one of the outcomes, of the most important outcomes of the movement, not what they have done for the social media or those massive protests, are the networks that have been created after all these movements and mobilization are remaining and are stronger than only the protest, because they will create some kind of social base for the movement that now, because of the COVID and that, of course, it's kind of nothing happened now. But those links, networks, and bonds were that will have the possibility to create a sustainable movement. And that's also another topic about if this is if we can consider this feminist movement as a movement with all the words and according to some theory, or if they are creating and they are in the process of creating this sustainable and long-term movement. So yeah, I think that is the most important.
Thank you. And we have one more question, and I think given the time, it'll have to be the last one today. But the question was, the participant was really interested and inspired by the video you showed of the mass demonstration with coordinated dancing and singing, the various demonstrations. And just the question was sort of what were the how-tos to coordinate that many people in doing a performance action. That was sort of impressive. And did any of the interviews or your observations sort of show you what were the, how did they create such a coordinated motion in a mass demonstration like that?
Wow, yeah, in the case of the Rapist in Your Way, was very spontaneous, was amazing, because was just like, Las Tesis started this performance in Chile, and they launched a convocation that after the first performance that was like a trend topic and became viral. And then they launched this convocation like, hey, women from all over the world, we invited you to do in your places this same performance. So people spontaneously, they organized, they created Facebook groups. WhatsApp was all by this social media, was not like a strict or unique leadership. Different collectives and movements started to calling people to gather and demonstrate in that way. So, and that's also how powerful performance and symbolic actions are. And yeah, I think that was very spontaneous. And of course, they had some logistics, but really was so very fast. There was not a central coordination of all those performances. The Las Tesis, the group, the performance group of Chile, they just said, you do it in your way, in your place, as you like. And wow, was so that shows us how these actions can be very I don't know, can touch people's and can create community, and can unify far more than, I don't know, like other kind of actions. For example, that now are asking me about how property or damage or destruction, how spark this dialogue. And yeah, when they started burning down that police station, of course people were like, oh, what's going on? I want to know why these girls are doing this. But it's divided. The opinion was always divided, from those who said like, oh, they are right and they are protesting because of this legitimate cause, and other people were like, oh, they are crazy and they are like dismissing the movement, dismissing the people, and having lots of misconceptions about it. So it's kind of double blade knife, right? Because you cannot use this and pretend that people always will be with you, but at the same time you will expect that people will, that you will cut some, that you will call attention from the public opinion. So it's very tricky. I cannot say why some property destructions, but I will say that when we or when this movement or any movement challenge a monument that is a symbol of power, I consider that like they are having this target of trying to destroy the symbols of oppression. But if you go and destroy a bus station, a store, or some place that doesn't have any relationship with what you are looking for, what you are demanding for, then it's complicated. I don't want to
Well,
judge.
these are really
I don't want
important
to just
debate,
complicate.
and so very much appreciate you raising this, but also just the inspiring creativity of the feminist movement in Mexico and the creative use of arts. And before we go, it's about time to wrap up. I just want to thank all the participants today and for the thoughtful questions. And Pancho, I just want to thank you again for doing this research and taking the time to share it with us through the International Center on Nonviolent Conflict. And we're currently working on September's webinar, and we'll have information out to that. But want to remind all the participants that they will get a link to the edited video. And if you have any additional questions, send them our way at webinar@nonviolent-conflict.org. And we can send those questions on to Pancho. And when we send out the email to all the registrants, we can have some answers to that. So thank you, everyone. And thank you, Pancho. And that will be the close of today's session. Thanks a lot, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you so much for all participants and ICNC for this opportunity. And Steve, thanks a lot.
Okay, you take care.